Well, today we are once again going to be in Judges chapter 6. If you missed last week, you missed the first half of the message, and we were looking at the story of Gideon. And we're going to be continuing that. I'm going to recap just a little bit for those of you who may have missed, or it's been a whole week. Maybe you forgot a few things. But when we come onto the scene of Gideon, he is a man that is hiding in a wine press, and he's trying to thresh out enough grain to feed his family. And there's a picture of what a wine press looks like. It's basically a hole in the ground. It could be man-made. It could be naturally formed. And the idea of the wine press was they would tread on the grapes, step on the grapes. The juice would collect down in the lower part. It was not the place to thresh grain. Threshing grain was usually done out in the open, and they would throw the grain up into the air, and the wind would blow the chaff to one side, and the grain, being heavier, would fall down, and that's how they would separate it. Gideon is hiding in the wine press. Why is he hiding? Well, because there was a group of people called the Midianites who were making raids on Israel and stealing all of their livestock and all of their grain, all of their agriculture, all of their produce. And we were told God raised up the Midianites as a tool of discipline because the Israelites had turned away from him and were living their lives in disobedience to God. The cycle that we talked about is repeated throughout the book of Judges, which roughly is about a 330-year period. And there's a picture of the cycle to kind of remind you. The cycle of, once again, calling out for the Lord's help. They had reached a place, God says they were obstinate. They had hardened their hearts. It wasn't like they said, we don't believe in God. They would have said, we believe in God. Of course we do. But they weren't obedient. They weren't following him from their heart. So now they are in trouble, and they call out to God for help, very much like we do. When we find ourselves in trouble and difficulty, we cry out to the Lord for help. And it's at this point where Gideon comes and appears, where an angel of the Lord comes and appears to Gideon, who is hiding in the winepress, and makes this astounding declaration. Greetings, valiant warrior. Greetings, mighty man of valor. Doesn't seem to fit a guy who's hiding in the winepress trying to get some grain. Again, I mentioned it. God sees past the outward and looks at the heart. You want to have a heart that's right with God. You want to have a heart that is open to what God would have for you. So we're going to look at verse 14. Again, this is just a little bit of a reminder. The Lord looked at him and said, "Go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" That aspect of go in this your strength. I've sent you. Your strength is going to be that I'm with you. That's going to be your strength. Gideon's success was not going to be based on his own strength. It was not going to be based on his intellectual genius. It was going to be based upon the fact God had chosen him and God had sent him. And the same is true for you and me today. Has God called you to something that is bigger than you? Has God called you to something that you feel totally inadequate to do? Then you are in the place where you are not depending on yourself, but on God to see you through. The fact that God has sent you is the very strength that you need to accomplish great things in his name. Now, I encourage you, read this whole story for yourself, because there are some nuggets of truth in the story that you can get if you will just do some very prayerful reading through the story. But I will tell you this. Gideon needed constant reassurance to do what God asked him to do. Now, maybe you are not like that. Maybe you hear the Lord say something and you're like, yes, God, I'm going to do it right now. there are others of us that sometimes we need to be like, Lord, did I really hear you right? I want to make sure it's you and not me. So could you just give me some type of confirmation? Well, Gideon was very much like that. And so we have the account where Gideon lays out the fleece on two different occasions. Lord, if it's really you, let the fleece be wet and the ground be dry. And God does it. And then the next night, Gideon's still a little unsure. Okay, God, this time, let the fleece be dry, but the ground be wet. And God does it. And finally, Gideon's like, okay, I guess it's you. I guess I'm going to follow what you say. The point is that Gideon needed constant encouragement. And God knew that about him. God knew that about him before he called him. I was reading something on Facebook. I had read this a while ago, but I saw it again yesterday. And it says something like this. Before God called you, he already took into account your stupidity. He already knows who we are. When he places the call on our lives, it's not like, oh, I didn't know that about you. Sorry, let me pick someone else. He knows who we are, and he knows what we will need to accomplish his will. And we see this laid out before us in the life of Gideon, and it should encourage us who struggle sometimes with wanting to understand the will of God, wanting to do the will of God, but at times unsure, God, what is your will? To know that God will make his will known to us. To know that as long as we keep seeking for him and keep asking him, he is going to make his will known to us. At another point in the story, Gideon is still a little unsure because the battle is about to happen. And so he gets to a place where God takes him and where he hears the dream of one of the enemy soldiers and how that God is going to be with Gideon. And Gideon hears that and says, okay, Lord, I believe now. I will follow through with your plan. So if you are someone who lacks confidence, God already knows that about you before he calls you. Just as the Lord knew that Gideon needed to be encouraged, he knows how to encourage you. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that our God knows that about us. Gideon was willing to be obedient whatever God asked him to do, as long as he had the assurance God was really with him. He needed that assurance. We need that assurance. So let's look at another part of Gideon's life. This time in chapter 7. That was chapter 6. We are now going to move to chapter 7, verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to hand Midian over to them. Otherwise Israel would become boastful, saying, my own power has saved me. Do you know, we tend to do that as human beings. God grants us a little bit of success in an area and we think, hey, maybe I am pretty good. Hey, maybe I do have all this under control. And it is the danger of the human ego, the human pride that can rise up inside of us. Here, God says, Gideon, I'm going to give you victory, but you have too many guys. Now, this strikes me a little bit funny after what I just said, of how God knows how we need to be encouraged. You would think God knew that Gideon needed to be encouraged, so that God would raise up an army bigger than the enemy army. That would be encouraging. God comes and says, hey, Gideon, you got too many guys. Because if I turn over Midian into your hands, you're going to become proud and think you did it. Verse 3, now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people. And when he says people, he's talking about soldiers. Proclaim in the hearing of the people, whoever is afraid and worried is to return and leave Mount Gilead. let's look at that scenario. You are being called to battle. And the leader comes and says, hey, any of you who are afraid, any of you who are scared, any of you who are nervous, you're free to go home. How many of us would be like, yeah, that's me. Thanks for the permission. I'm ready to leave right now. A lot of people were in that same place. So on that day, 22,000 returned. 22,000 people left that day. 10,000 remained. So let's do simple math. He started with 32,000, which was still smaller than the size of the enemy's army. And God comes and says, okay, we got to get rid of a few people. We don't want people to get proud. Just tell them, anyone who's afraid, let them leave. And so Gideon does it. God, you're with me. Okay, any of you who are afraid, go home. I would have a feeling within Gideon, he was probably hoping that they would all be like, no, we are with you, Gideon. We're going to be with you, buddy. We're not leaving. 22,000 said, thank you. See you later. Gideon was already nervous and scared to begin with. And now God tells him, you have too many people. What leader would feel confident when basically 2/3 of the people that they were supposed to lead leave in one day? That's not going to strike the chord of confidence. But notice what God does. God, in his wisdom, from the very beginning, he weeds out the people who were afraid right from the start. God says, Gideon, the ones who are afraid, get rid of them. The ones who are not going to be able to trust you as the leader or trust me as their God, let them go. Think about that. The ones who were fearful, the ones who were scared, once they got toward the battle, once it began, they would become the very seeds of discouragement for the other soldiers. Oh, look how big the enemy is. We better get out of here. We can't beat them. Let's run away. They would become the ones who would discourage the rest of the soldiers. When I first became a pastor many years ago, there was an older pastor who served as a mentor for us. And he made this statement, and at the time I was like, I don't know if that's right. But what did I know? I was young. He made this statement, he goes, there will be times when people leaving your church will be positive. That's not why I was the pastor. I was there to help build the church. I was there to bring people in. And you're telling me that there's a positive at times when people leave? I couldn't understand it. But through the years, I've come to understand the truth of that statement. That there are times where God moves people. And he moves them for a reason. Sometimes he moves them as a part of his will for their life. He moves them on to other ministries to serve him in certain areas. And I've also found that sometimes he removes people who would be a bad influence, who would discourage the church if they remained in the direction God wanted to lead. So back to Gideon. Gideon's already outnumbered. Army goes from 32,000 men down to 10,000. But God wasn't done yet. Verse 4. Then the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Notice the wording. Gideon wasn't testing them. The Lord was testing them. Gideon, bring the men to the water. I will test them for you. So it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "You shall put everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps in one group, and everyone who kneels down to drink in another." Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled down to drink the water. God tells Gideon to separate those who lapped water out of their hand from those who knelt down to drink. I heard someone in a commentary, I read something that one of the ideas might have been this, that those who lapped water like a dog from their hand would be able to be alert, keep their eyes up, see if the enemy was coming. But those who drank with their face in the water could see nothing but satisfying their own thirst, their own need for the moment. Peter in the New Testament tells us that we are to be on the alert, to be ready, to be on your guard, for your enemy the devil prowls around as a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. We're called to be alert. We're called to be watchful. We're called to be on the ready. Be careful that you do not let your guard down, because that is when the enemy will strike. So God takes away some more soldiers from Gideon. This is what some people will call the principle of addition by subtraction. Addition by subtraction. Sometimes, in order to make something better or work more effectively, you must take something away. Over the last, 15, 20 years, in our country and probably around the world, we've heard a lot of things going on in the business and industry community called downsizing. People begin to look at, how can we do this more efficiently? How can we scale things back and still produce what we need to produce? The question in that is, has God brought you to a point in your life where He has been subtracting things from you? There was a time in my life where that happened to me, and I did not understand what was going on. There was a time when I was in youth group here. And when I was in youth group, I had become very involved. I was a leader in youth group and did a lot of things, led the youth praise team, and just did a lot of stuff. And this one summer came, and things began to be removed from me. The youth pastor was asking someone else to do things. And I was like, what's going on? Like, did I do something wrong? And I didn't realize at the time, it took me to be able to look back. But what God was doing, He was pulling things away from me so that I could be prepared to do what He was calling me to do. You see, at that point, while I had been called to be a pastor, I was going to college at Westminster. I was working on a religion degree. I thought I was living in the blessings of God. I had free tuition because my parents worked there. I was living the good life the way I looked at it. And then in that one summer, things started pulling away, and I was like, God, what's happening? I didn't realize that God is all about preparation. What was happening and what occurred was, as God pulled things away from me and other people began doing them, what that actually did, it was healthy for the group, because God was about to call me away. In that one summer, my life changed from being here to God calling me to go to Valley Forge. Now, if I had just up and left and there had been a vacuum of all the things I was doing, it would not have been healthy. God was taking care of His people, even the youth. God was taking care of them. God does everything well. We need to come to realize that. He does everything well. And there are times we will not be able to understand His ways until we are able to reflect back and see what He has done. But maybe today you are in a season where you feel that maybe some things are being pulled away from you. Maybe ministry, maybe areas of things you used to enjoy, but now you're like, I don't know if I enjoy that anymore. And it feels like God's withdrawing some things. If that's the case, ask Him, Lord, what do you have for me? What are you changing? You're changing something in my life for a reason. And so, Lord, I'm going to keep my eyes on you. I'm going to trust you. But I'm asking you, show me. Show me what you want me to do. God always has a purpose when He does such things. The first purpose might be to get your attention. Like, hey, something's changing. Hey, something's going on. You can get in a normal routine of life and you think it's just going to go on like that forever. And all of a sudden, something different happens. And so that's when you begin saying, okay, God, you're getting my attention about this. What's going on? The second reason He can do that is to keep you from trusting in yourself. You see, many times when we get used to doing things, we can develop the mindset of, I've done this so many times I can do it in my sleep. Like, Lord, I've done this so many times, like I know you need to help me, but really, I can just do it. And it's kind of like what God says to Gideon. If I give you victory with this many men, you're going to end up thinking you did it. And that's not what I want. And so He may want us to get our attention and keep us from trusting in ourselves. And then the third thing is to prepare you for the next season of life. It is part of His plan for you. It is part of His preparation. Sometimes when things change, it is not that you've done something wrong. Now listen, if you've fallen into sin and you're experiencing the ramifications and consequences of that, you need to repent of that. But if your heart is to follow the Lord, if your heart is to be obedient to Him, and He begins adjusting and changing things, just keep asking Him, Lord, what are you doing? Show me what you need me to do. Show me what the next step is. Verse 7. And the Lord said to Gideon, I will save you with the 300 men who lapped and will hand the Midianites over to you. So have all the other people go, each man to his own home. Again, simple math. Started with 32,000, 22,000 left with 10,000. All right, take them down and watch them drink. The ones who drink in this way, send them home. What do you have left? 300. How confident would you feel in this situation? Going into battle, fighting multiple thousands of enemy soldiers with 300 men. I would dare say that strategy is not taught at West Point. Most of the time, you take into account, how many do I have? How many do they have? What are my weapons? What are their weapons? Can we win this? Should we avoid the battle? But again, we have to remember God is at work in this. That's what makes the difference. It is God at work. The reality is, in yourself, if you were in that situation, you would have no confidence in yourself. You would have no confidence saying, all right, 300 men, with me that's 301, let's go do this. It wouldn't be that. It would be, all right, men, God has brought us to this point. God has said He is going to be with us. God has said He is going to give us victory over our enemy. And so we've got to keep our eyes on God in this. God said, I will deliver you with the 300 men. Now, here's a little truth nugget for you. By the way, Wednesday nights, we ask a lot of questions in our Bible study on Wednesday nights. So I have a question for you on a Sunday morning. Who was God's chosen man in this story? Yeah. Actually, it was all of them. God chose Gideon, yes, but God also chose the 300. The 300 were God's chosen. God weeded all the other ones out and said, these 300, these are my chosen warriors for you, Gideon. These are the ones that will be used, and I will give you victory with them. Gideon was chosen by God to be the leader, but he also chose the 300 men who would follow Gideon as the leader. In your life, there may be times when you are the leader. But there will probably be more times in your life when you are one of the 300. When you are the one that God calls to follow the one He has chosen to lead. The Bible gives us a little peek into Gideon's life. We get this story about Gideon, but we're really told nothing about the lives of the 300 men other than that they were chosen. Yet, I believe these 300 men were men who trusted God. Men who were not afraid to obey godly leadership. And I believe they were men who were devoted to Gideon. Try to put yourself in the place of the 300 soldiers who are now about to go into battle against tens of thousands of enemy warriors. How confident would you be in following this guy who basically just dismissed about 32,000 men from the army? How confident would you be in that process? Be like, okay, there's 32,000 of us. We're outnumbered, but we can fight hard. And then you see all the numbers decline down to 300. How confident would you be in following this man Gideon? And then you hear the battle plan, the strategy. Chapter 7, verse 15. I mentioned about the dream a little earlier. When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. Then he returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has handed over to you the camp of Midian. And he divided the 300 men into 3 units. And he put trumpets and empty pitchers in their hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. And then he said to them, Look at me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. And when I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you also blow the trumpets around the entire camp and say, For the Lord and for Gideon. This is why I say these 300 men had to trust God and the leader God had put in place. That strategy, we're going to defeat them with trumpets and pitchers. Gideon, how about a sword? A bazooka? Anything, like, come on, a rock. No. Trumpets and pitchers. Okay, you're the leader. At the appointed time of the attack, they did exactly as they were instructed. They blew their trumpets. They smashed their pitchers. They took out the torches. And they yelled, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Now, whether you are at a point where you are a leader or you are a follower, and by the way, a good leader has had to be a good follower at some point. Either way, I want you to see you have been chosen by the Lord. I want you to see where you are today. You have been chosen by Him for a purpose, to fulfill a plan. You are here for such a time as this, not by mistake. It's not a fluke. It is by God's design and His choice over you. John 15, we read these words, "You have not chosen me, but I chose you. I appointed you that you would go and bear fruit. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into His marvelous light." Are you called to lead in some way? Sometimes we are called to lead and we don't want to. Gideon did not want to lead. If Gideon had the choice, he would have been quite happy threshing some grain out in that wine press and going back to his family and saying, "Here, I got some food for us for today." But God intervened. God says, "I have a bigger plan for you than what you've thought to this point." Gideon was like, "Look, it can't be me. I'm the least in my father's household. I'm the least of the tribes. I got nothing to offer you." God says, "Oh, I see you. I see more of you than you know of yourself." And so God may call you to opportunities of leadership. Now, it may not be 300. It might be 3. But it could be 100. It could be 1,000. The point is, if God has been speaking to you about an area, if you've been seeing an area, be like, "Man, we need to do something here. Something needs to be done." That may indeed be God showing you, "I want you to lead something." And do not back away from it. Has He been withdrawing things from your life in preparation so that you could accomplish that? Look at it. What have you been seeing? What has God been putting together? How has He been ordaining the timing and the circumstance for your life to be used for His glory? Are you called to lead? Then follow the Lord. Follow Him. Are you called to follow a godly leader? Then follow that leader as they follow Christ. Because when we do what we have been called to do, assuredly there will be victory ahead for each and every one who keep their eyes on Jesus. That is what is ahead for us. If we trust Him and we trust the leadership God places in our lives, and if we're willing to be the leader He calls us to be. Let's bow our heads.